This is The Hollow, a dark fantasy adventure written by Dean Dunakin and narrated by Louis Krahn. Chapter 9 The Manor. As they hiked that day and another, Noom told Omega what he knew of seers and their capabilities, which was considerably more than she knew, though she was able to share a few truths he had not known. They were still a long distance from the mountains, but high enough to see far and wide. They were crossing into a territory generally referred to as Rowlands, a shorthand for the Royal Lands, where noble folk used to live on their estates, villas, manors, or heavily fortified structures, supported by the farms and other working communities they had already passed through. It was stereotypically what looters looked for in the Hollow, so he often sent them to Rowlands. There were more valuable treasures to be had elsewhere, but he had seen the occasional gemstone or chest of coins come back from the berm from here. They came to a gravel-covered road that branched off from their route, and Noom guessed it was a path to one of the manors. He was surprised to see a man sitting placidly on a large rock near the overgrown topiary and toppled colored posts that marked the entrance. It was the first living person they'd seen since leaving Elocant. Dev touched the head of his mace in his belt, and Aiden shifted to a more active grip on his sword. Noom told them, "I don't think this man is a threat, but be ready nonetheless." He stepped forward, leading the others to within a few paces. The man sat with elbow on knee, supporting his head with his palm. His eyes followed the group while they approached, then resumed staring ahead when Noom stopped. "Hello, how are you, fellow?" Noom asked. The man slowly looked at Noom again with his eyes, then resumed his languid effect. To the surprise of the others, Noom walked up and pushed the man off his perch. The man fell on his side, then slowly arose and resumed his place on the rock and his absent vigil. "Let's go," Noom said, and started up the gravel path. The other three followed, each gazing quizzically at the man, who didn't even look up when they passed. "Shouldn't we help him?" whispered Aiden. "He wouldn't respond if we tried. Wouldn't follow to safety, wouldn't eat or drink whatever offered," Noom said. After they gained a small distance, Omega said, "It's like he wasn't even there. Almost a blur." "You're pretty close," Noom replied. "He is near the end, desiccated. Whatever he was in life is gone, or so buried it will never surface. Too much time in the Hollow can do that, and no one returns from that state." "Poor sod," said Dave. "Indeed, I pity the desiccated. Death would be a release, but they lack the impulse for even that. But it's a good sign for us. The fact that nothing else has killed him means the manor up ahead is likely vacant." The main building came into view, and the gravel path gave way to a courtyard of intermittent paving stones. Whole sections of pavers were missing from some areas, obviously looted en masse. Ground cover had taken root between the stones, sprinkled with stray saplings. Noom couldn't fathom hauling a wagon load of large stones from here to anywhere, but to each their own. An empty pedestal dominated the center of the courtyard. An overly bright blue peacock wandered haughtily through the courtyard as though he owned the place, which Noom supposed he did. The manor building was a 2-story brick compound with slanted roofs stretching up an additional level in the middle with ornamental stone turrets. Before they entered the broken-down front door, Noom leaned his staff against the building, reached back over his shoulder, and pulled his short sword. "I thought you said this way was safe," said Dev. Noom shrugged and tilted his hand back and forth to say, more or less. I'll stay outside for now, if that's okay. We're not sleeping here, right? Asked Dev. Aiden loosened the warhammer in his belt, then clapped Dev on the shoulder on his way past. Don't want to be lord of the manor? Not this one. Give a shout if you see anything. The inside was dusted with pollen, plaster chips, and powder. Presumably valued trim had been ripped from the walls. A torn painting dangled from a large picture frame that twisted across the floor like a beast devouring the portrait's subject. The dust in the air scattered shafts of sunlight streaming through the open windows of the large foyer. So what are we here for, Noom? Aiden asked, poking some debris with his scabbard. Noom was on his way up a grand staircase. Whatever you fancy, he shouted down. Omega skipped up the stairs to catch up and saw him down a hall poking his head into various bedrooms. Aha, he said, and finally entered one. She found him rummaging through a woman's vanity, tossing sundry items on the floor with glee and reverence. He pulled out a small framed square like it was a lost relic. Don't break it, he said, dropping his happy demeanor, and tossed it to Omega. She fumbled and caught it before it hit the floor. A compact mirror? Is this a hint about my grooming? Or is this another one of those girls' common defense against the revenants? Confuse them. They already think their double is their reflection. Oh, makes sense. Noom brushed past her out of the room. After he rounded the corner, Omega took a quick glance at herself in the mirror, grimaced, and tucked it into a pocket. She found him next in what was probably the Lord's dressing chamber, rifling through a wardrobe. Nope, definitely not, he mumbled. Aha, he said again, grinning from ear to ear. He pulled out a hardy and expensive-looking hunting cloak and flourished it for her to look at. What do you think? Good? He tried it on, and his face dropped. It was tight on his shoulders and draped down to mid-thigh. Suppressing a laugh, she said, My lord must have been a wee fellow. Noom sighed and threw it back in the wardrobe, then trudged back downstairs. They wandered around the main floor, poking around in cabinets and closets. Noom was happy to find a sheaf of blank paper and a metal inkwell that was tightly sealed, still with liquid ink, but no pen. Omega found a deck of playing cards, a treasure that other looters had overlooked. Noom picked through a debris pile on their way through the dining hall and poked some lute strings. They ran across Dev in the kitchen, who was unsuccessfully rooting through the kitchenware for any great finds. He had found a sewing area and replaced some thread, needles, and other repair materials he was low on. Satisfied they had made an efficient search, they exited to where Aiden stood sentry in the courtyard. He had switched with Dev after checking the armory. Upon seeing them, he held up a pair of goggles similar to Omega's, but with ornamental engravings, a different slit pattern, and an elaborately braided headband. One eye was crushed flat, the other dented. I don't know how old these are, Aiden said, but they were on the floor of the armory, which was in complete disarray and smeared with blood. Some sort of battle took place in there. Noom took the goggles in hand. He turned them over, examining all sides. The dust covering the main rooms was undisturbed wall to wall. These are clean. How was the armory? Scuff marks all over. Something happened recently. Involving a seer. Noom rubbed his chin, pondering the item. There are symbols engraved around the sides. I don't know the language, Noom observed. He passed them around. None of them had seen them before. He started rummaging around the courtyard and puzzled the rest of the companions by gathering a handful of peacock tail feathers. He carved one into a pen with his knife, then copied down the symbols and patterns from the goggles. When finished, he offered the crushed item to Omega, who shook her head. He shrugged and tossed it aside, then started back down the path. "You're right. Best not to hold on to such artifacts." Before resuming the main trail, they passed the desiccated man and traded sad gazes with him until he resumed his solitary gloom. Thank you for listening to this Ember and Sparks production. Click the box on the left to listen to the next chapter or the box on the right to see an overview of all chapters available for this story. Check out the links in the description to listen to this audiobook without interruption. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss a new story. See you soon.